Okay, 17 past the hour on the Janet Mefferd Show. So the Obama administration is defending what it is calling critical. It's a critical phone records collection that they have obtained by secret court order. They're justifying the surveillance of millions of Americans' phone records as anger is growing over this order that we've just learned about from the UK magazine, The Guardian. I'm sorry, but if I were the New York Times or the Washington Post, I'd feel like a heel right now. You know, Breitbart points out there hasn't been one of these major scandals that has been broken by the mainstream media. And I know if you're not somebody who's ever worked in the media, that probably doesn't matter. Like, who cares who broke it? They care. Oh, they care. They care. If there is a huge story and they weren't the first to discover it, then they're always playing catch up. And they're doing what a lot of people don't want to do in the media, which is play off somebody else's story, play off somebody else's scoop. And that's got to be incredibly embarrassing for them. It's just unbelievable. Well, we are privileged right now to have with us Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who has been such a stalwart for freedom and liberty and the Constitution, and I'm just glad he could join us today, talk a little bit about this and maybe some other things as we have time. But Senator Cruz, thank you so much for being with us today.
Janet, it is great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. What is your reaction to this? The Obama administration is saying that this phone records collection obtained by secret court order was critical to fight terrorism. What do you make of this?
Well, I think we need to wait and see what the facts are and what specifically the breadth was. But I will say this, that we have seen a pattern from the Obama administration and a long-standing pattern of disregarding the Constitution and disregarding the Bill of Rights and being willing to abuse the institutions of government to target political enemies, whether it was the First Amendment and going after critical reporters and going after their phone records and their email records, or also under the First Amendment, going after servicemen and women and threatening them with court-martial if they share their faith with others, about as horrific a violation of our constitutional rights as one can imagine. Or the Second Amendment and the repeated efforts of the Obama administration to undermine the right to keep and bear arms, or the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, whether it's drone policies that target U.S. citizens, or whether it's the IRS targeting conservatives and Tea Party groups and pro-life groups, and that pattern of being willing to disregard the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is deeply troubling. And in that context, I think all of us are concerned about efforts of this administration to get more and more personal information about the citizens and potentially to abuse it.
Well, that's what everybody is worried about. Now, they're saying that, in fact, this was legal. You can do this under Section 215 of the Patriot Act and the section of, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. But people are beginning to feel as if this administration cannot be trusted. And I think that's a core issue for people. Are we, issuing hyperbole by saying we feel like we're beginning to live in a police state? How do you address that as a senator and alleviate people's fears that your government is not doing something nefarious?
Right. Well, I think there are two components of that. One is the question about the trust and credibility of this administration, the Obama administration. And as all of these scandals have unfolded, a pattern we've seen is a consistent willingness to mislead, to be less than honest. Indeed, in recent weeks, we have seen at least two flat-out falsehoods from senior members of the administration. With regard to Benghazi, we saw the White House press secretary, on behalf of the President of the United States, state that the State Department and the White House had edited only one word in the Benghazi talking points, namely the word consulate. And within 48 hours, ABC News reported that that was not the case. In fact, there had been a dozen edits. They had repeatedly edited out Al-Qaeda and references to terrorists. And what the senior White House spokesperson said was simply flatly, objectively false. Likewise, the leadership of the IRS told Congress that the IRS had not been targeting conservatives and Tea Party groups and pro-life groups, and we now know that is directly, objectively false. The senior leadership knew it was false, and indeed the senior leadership at the White House knew it was false. And when you see an administration that is willing to abuse the machinery of federal government and then mislead the American people about it, that necessarily undermines trust in government.
It does. And a lot of people have pointed out that we have little confidence, at least those of us who are conservatives, we have little confidence when we have an administration who has, for example, called Nidal Hasan at Fort Hood workplace violence. Now this week he says, no, he was defending the Taliban. That's why he killed 13 people at Fort Hood. How in the world can you get people to believe that this was used as an act of countering terrorism and terrorist activity when A, it involved millions of people who weren't really, under investigation for any sort of wrongdoing that we know of, and B, when we recognize that terrorism has been kind of an interesting issue when it comes to this administration?
No, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, this is an administration that has proven itself almost entirely incapable of even uttering the words radical Islamic terrorist. And if you cannot admit who it is that is trying to harm you and who it is that is trying to kill you, your ability to actually prevent terror attacks is severely compromised. But, Janet, there's a second issue with all of these intercepts of phone records and the IRS and everything else, which is just an issue of government power, regardless of what administration is in power. Anytime you have too much power concentrated in Washington, that is a fundamental threat to our liberty. And it's one of the reasons why I think the simplest and most direct solution to this abuse from the IRS is to abolish the IRS,
right?
To shut it down, to padlock it, and instead move to a simple flat tax so that every American could fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And, as we've heard the stories of these IRS abuses, we've heard stories, for example, of the IRS demanding of some groups, tell us what books you're reading. Fill out book reports on the specific books because we want to assess what you're reading. We heard a report from another group where the IRS demanded to know, tell us the content of your prayers.
Right.
Tell us what you're praying for. And, Janet, the United States government has no business whatsoever inquiring of any American the content of our prayers.
Right.
And that level of power is necessarily subject to abuse. The best solution is abolish the IRS. And indeed, I would urge your listeners, if you agree, we have a national petition we've launched on our website, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. And we're seeing Americans from all over the country come together, signing the petition, standing up and saying, enough is enough, limit this power, protect our privacy, limit government, and protect our liberty.
Good. That's great. I think everybody ought to do that because I'm in complete agreement with you. It's time to abolish the IRS. In the meantime, on this particular scandal that has emerged today, Senator Cruz, what should be done? Should the section of the Patriot Act that they are citing for doing this court order be addressed? How should Congress respond, do you think?
Well, on the specific question of the NSA intercepts, I think we need to be cautious and not jump to conclusions. And so from my end, the first step is that I want to discover what the facts are, what precisely they're intercepting, what it's being used for. Because there's no doubt that there is an important role targeting terrorists.
Right.
And the distinction is, can we separate terrorists from American citizens and from law-abiding citizens? And I think it would be a mistake to jump to conclusions, but the reasons people are reacting so strongly is this administration has proven itself untrustworthy over and over again, and so when it says, trust us, it's very hard to take that at face value.
Yes, great point. So true. Well, and this is going to be something I'm sure that's going to go on for quite a while as people try to get to the bottom of this. But when you're talking about an overreaching government, and you have so many scandals simultaneously, which I find interesting to note that, as Breitbart has pointed out, none of these scandals were uncovered by the American mainstream media. This one was uncovered by a UK paper, The Guardian. How do we go forward really trying to find out what's going on in government when we now realize the mainstream media is not really going to help us uncover that stuff?
Well, and it's even worse than that, unfortunately. Not only is the media not going to help uncover this stuff, but for the last 4.5 years, the media has been like the palace guards. I mean, they have been defending the Obama administration and trying to shut down any inquiry into its conduct. Ironically, of all of the scandals, the one that may have the biggest impact on that is the seizures of the AP's phone records and emails because of all of the scandals, that's the one that has started to have a little bit of effect turning the media.
Yes.
And getting them to actually do their jobs with regard to the other scandals. Prior to that, there was virtually no interest in even reporting, even inquiring about abuse of power. I mean, when citizens raised, for example, the issue of the IRS's abuse of power, media had no interest in it. It was not a topic. I mean, going after ordinary citizens, the reaction from the media was to laugh at you. This was black helicopter stuff.
Oh, of course.
And every day we discover it is worse and worse and worse. The person who was in charge of the office that was persecuting conservative groups, Tea Party groups, pro-life groups, pro-Israel groups, Jewish groups, was promoted to be put in charge of the office that is enforcing Obamacare, that is assembling the largest database of information about the American citizenry that's ever been put together. And the media had zero interest in this until the Obama administration began targeting the media. I hope now they will start doing their job, and if not, it's up to the citizens to do it. It's up to the citizens to keep putting pressure on it. And in Congress, we need to do our job in Congress, get to the bottom of these scandals, learn the facts, and ensure that there's accountability.
I agree completely. Now, I know we only have about a minute left, but I have to touch on immigration very, very quickly. Sure. I know that you have put out this letter with some of your colleagues there about the flaws in this bill. Now it's being said that the votes probably aren't there in the Senate. What is your take on that?
Well, on immigration, I am both optimistic and pessimistic. I'm optimistic because I think there is a great deal of bipartisan agreement on many aspects of immigration reform. I think there is widespread agreement, particularly outside of Washington, that we've got to get serious about securing our borders, that it doesn't make sense that we don't know post 9/11 who's coming into this country, what their criminal background, what their history is, and we need to put manpower and technology, and we need to fix the problem. I think there is also widespread bipartisan agreement that we need to improve and streamline legal immigration, reduce the paperwork, reduce the bureaucracy, reduce the waiting periods, that we need to remain a nation that doesn't just welcome, that celebrates legal immigrants. My dad, 55 years ago, came as an immigrant from Cuba. He had been imprisoned, he'd been tortured, he was 18. If we do both of those, we can solve it. Right now, this current bill doesn't do that, and so we need to fix it.
Well, very well said. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, a great hero, and we're so glad you were able to join us. Thank you so much, Senator Cruz.
Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you for everything you do.
Oh, God bless. Thanks for being with us, and tedcruz.org, and we'll be right back.